Sister, 26th of October 937. Lord Aldhelm, would you tell my Witan what you have told me? Assembled were the lords of, Utad looked around him, Wessex, lords from Sent, his mother's land, others his father's lords, many whom Utad recognized had been his brother's supporters at the battle for Edward's crown, but many more were of Mercia, and he had kept them close to him after Ethelfled had died. And then, of course, there were Aethelstan's favourites, the Norse who advised him. He looked to the head of the Mercian guard, his jewels in his hair and at his throat twinkling. Even for a king, Utad wondered where his taste for the finer things had come from. It was the eve of battle, but the King Aethelstan had kept them waiting while he had rest, and their war council was beyond the daylight hours now. Yes, Lord King, Aldhelm, as old as Utad, but looking older, turned his weary eyes to the Rex Totius Britanniae, weary from strain, from effort, from the very deluge of need coming to Caesar's gates with the limited resources to help those people, with a war at their door. In the darkness, lit only with a few sheep-fat candles, even fuel was becoming more desperate. All looked to the old Mercian lord, Edmund, Eardred, both young in years, barely into their teens, stood beside their brother. Why, at the battle's edge, had they come? Utad did not know, other than this battle was going to be greater, bigger, more deadly than any that had come before it, and concerned all of Britain. All knew it. Edmund was the Etheling. Aethelstan had no heirs, was unmarried, and he had taken the conscious option to bring no heirs into the world when he had younger brothers to carry on the line of the Eining to be kings of the whole of Britain. For it was not the Christians fighting the Norse and Danes now, it was the Christians, shaped by Augustine's teachings, about to come up against an alliance of armies consisting of Britons and Gaels, peoples who had lived in the island that Aethelstan was claiming kingship over, who wanted the Angles and the Saxons to be gone, whether by exodus or by the sword. And that concerned Edmund, who would become the next king of the whole of Britain. The best Aethelstan could do, in Utad's opinion, was to bring the Northern Alliance to heel, but not to massacre, for what kings remained, what Cymric, what Picts, what Gaels, would never forget any harm done to them, and would seek again and again to do what Constantine was intending to do. Lords, Aldhelm began. The representative to King Constantine bade our Lord King Aethelstan, and here, Aldhelm nodded deferentially to him, his best greetings, and asked that the meeting place be here. Sister, Aethelstan asked, and Aldhelm confirmed. Heston, interrupted Utad, who, from the moment he had left their lodgings, a house which accommodated himself, his men, the women and Benedetto up until that point, had said nothing, but listened as Ethelstan's lords had brought him intelligence. Heston, Aldhelm told him, nodding. He represents Constantine, who is not yet in the field. Heston is representing the Northern Alliance, not Anlaf. Aethelstan voiced the question that Utad wanted answering next. The Northern Alliance holds, Aldhelm told Aethelstan. He would not confirm it, but we know from our spies that we expect to face Constantine, for Alba, Anlaf for his father's throne in Norfolk, probably Owain of Strathclyde, and perhaps even Hywel of the United Western Cymric. And, it is known that Eidfol of Gwynedd is not at Aberfraw, and the location of the pretender to that throne, Sindlin, is also not known. Nor, and Utad noticed the briefest of hesitations when Aldhelm began the next sentence, Osrith of Berwick, though we have several prisoners captured raiding north of Mumcester who claim to be of those lands. They are my lands, for the purposes of this alliance, Utad put in, holding out his arm in Finan's direction, for they, too, have a lord, Finan of Berwick, as a direct opposition to whoever has been put as overlord of Berwick by the hoary king of Alba. He added, the gesture more to remind Finan of his position than remind him of Osrith. It was an unnecessary insult, but he said it to prove a point. Bibbenberg was adjacent, and he would have no lord of Ethelstan's cause be anything other than clear that beyond the Roman wall the land was his. You may hand the prisoners to me. Expecting an argument, he stepped forward, but another point was raised, and this time it came from the Etheling. Edmund stepped ahead of Aethelstan, a gesture exceeded by the king. They expect to fight us tomorrow, or the next, he said, his brow furrowing in the same way Ethelstan's did when he was a young man. Neither looked like their father, however, though he suspected that Edmund, and Eardred, who he remembered to be mere young children, babe in arms in Eardred's case, on the occasion of Ethelstan's coronation, were no less able fighters than their elder brother. And yet Constantine is nowhere to be seen. We know of the catastrophic devastations, but no hint of armies meeting up at Seist. If this is what this Heston says, Uhtred voiced his opinion, standing before the king. How do we know that this is even a challenge? You suspect a ruse? Aldhelm asked, peering across to Edmund from his default position of looking to the king. There has been an increase in Norse on the Wirulum, Edmund suggested. The Wirulum is Norse land, Miriel pointed out, stepping beside Aldhelm. No one censured him for speaking up, though he was not a lord. Our late Lady Ethelfled, he continued, gifted that land to the Norse, kin to Sigtryggr, kin to Guthfrith and Anlaf and Redengel. If anything, it is an ideal place for an army to hide. An army that could have accumulated over a period of several months and laid low within the population. If I may, Uhtred stepped before Ethelstan. You have your strategy, Lord King, he told him, based on numbers in the field, based on all factions being together to fight together on the morn. What if the armies come separately, come when we are weaker? Ethelstan turned to Uhtred and held him coolly. You have intelligence? He asked him. And when Uhtred did not answer to Ethelstan immediately, the king got to his feet. Lord Uhtred, Constantine has been seen coming down East Coast and up Humber. It was Egil who had told him this, Egil Skilligrimson, who had contacts around Lindsey and the East Coast further north to Beverley. Fearing an attack, they joined Kin at Ofoik who, in turn, found Kin at Momseaster, all returning to Seaster and meeting up with Egil the day before. And you fear your sister is involved? Fear? Uhtred looked at the king carefully. I do not fear my sister. Yet you believe, and, as has been discussed here regarding your sister's direct involvement, that Heston is bringing us false information? There may be more to Heston's testimony, that is all I am saying, Uhtred replied, feeling the coolness of his grandfather between them both. We are given to understand that your sister's union with Domhnall Uineal, he broke off for a second, inviting Uhtred to dispute, has alloyed the factions, has cemented this so-called Northern Alliance. All these are our disparate bands of people, Aldhelm postulated. He turned to Uhtred and laid tired eyes on him. Perhaps Heston has indeed come to disrupt and confound us, making us believe something we do not. And yet, Ethelstan rose to his feet. It is you who told us of the poem, Lord Aldhelm. Ethelstan told the most loyal of the Mercen elite. You told us the poem that was constructed shortly after the meeting between Constantine, Anlaf, Hywel, all the Northern and Britain kings. Aldhelm said nothing, looked away and bowed his head. King Ethelstan then turned to look at Uhtred. Given that Osrith of Berwick is kin to you, Lord Uhtred, perhaps it is true that you wish us to believe that Heston is perpetuating a deception. Perhaps she has confided in you details of the attack. Perhaps she has given you to believe that there is nothing to be had in this battle. I say different. He turned to his other warlords, garnered from every corner of the Heptasy, even Cornwallum. So you hear the Lord Uhtred? There was a murmur of agreement as they listened to the king. All of them, everyone, had to go to their men, relay the battle plans. All were certain that the enemy were going to meet them in the field as one, the Norse, the Gaels, the Cymric. I believe my sister's position has allowed Constantine to act boldly, Uhtred told him, stepping in front of Ethelstan, his anger bubbling to the surface as Ethelstan's coldness began to irritate him. What you believe the strategy to be, I cannot say, for you clearly know more than I do, Lord King. Where is she, Uhtred? Ethelstan took a step towards him. Where is your sister? Is she with you, Lord of Bibbenberg? Has she loaded you with intelligence that you can come to me with selected facts hoping to influence this battle, for your precious Bibbenberg? He stood before his throne, in the semi-darkness. What deal has she with Constantine so you may keep your lands? That you walk amongst Mercians and West Saxons against whose very existence an oath has been taken? His words rose like a tide, a wave on a black sea. As the accusations came forth, none. Utad shouted back, taking an aggressive step towards the king. I have no deals with my sister. Nothing has been said about Wittenberg. And yet, Ethelstan continued, is it not true that her daughter, whose land has secured the alliance between our enemies, is the adopted mother of your own grandchildren? Your own grandson purported to be the next king after Anlaf. His face was impassive, but there was no doubting the accusation. It was logical, it made sense. And, if Utad was in his place, he would have come to exactly the same conclusion. Lord, I did not expect. Silence, Lord Aldhelm. Ethelstan turned to the face of the weary Mercen lord, then he wheeled round to look at Utad. And there it was, victory on the features of Alfred's grandson. He knew the situation was desperate. He knew that in him, Utad, a sense of Bibbenberg was higher on his list of priorities than was Alfred's vision of an England. He had to provoke what more or less equated to the truth from him, for he was not one of Ethelstan's lords, he was not of England. Northumbria was far from settled, and he wanted to know Utad's position. He had Bibbenberg under guard, and a lord who claimed to hold Northumbria. That Utad was standing before him, had come from the east to the west coast to be at Seaster at the destruction of the country did not always automatically ensure that Utad's motives were sound. Though he and Ethelstan were allies now, Utad could well be deprived of his home at Ostroke, should he choose to act with Osrith. If Osrith was involved, her involvement would be with the Northern Alliance, her adopted family, more kin to her than he ever had been. I know not where she is. Lord King, he added, just in time to halt the outspilling of anger, for all, even the young princes, had hands to their swords. I swear it. And so, Utad, who had last sworn to Wessex before his grandfather, bent his knee and held serpent breath in both hands. My blade is yours, King Ethelstan. Utad did not look up as Ethelstan accepted his oath, but rose only when he felt the king's hand on his shoulder, stepping back beside Finan, suitably chastened into his position, having revealed his true intentions of being the because of Ethelstan's connivance. The prisoners are in the chapel. They will be there when you are ready. Take custody of them. Now, if you will leave us, we have much to discuss. The night was cold on Utad's face, red with the anger and shame he now felt for the trap into which he had fallen. If I had put money on any one of those bastards to come forward to discuss terms with Aldhelm, I would not have said Hestin. Finan turned his head in the cold of the night towards Utad, but said nothing. Both knew who Utad was suggesting. You know that in order for this alliance to hold, my sister has married the bare-assed bastard. That the union must mean marriage. Utad kicked a stone across the courtyard as the gates opened. Another cart was being drawn in, slowly, two bodies on the back not yet dead, gave a shudder as the wheels hit a dip in the flagstones. More mutilations, more atrocities. Yes, Finan agreed, his word flat, stiff. And she would have had to have humped him. That was enough. Finan stopped still and turned, so he faced Utad, his face impassive. Still, as if it was taking a great deal of effort to be so. It is a complicated piece of law, Utad, he told his lord carefully. Technically, because I abandoned her, she can be married for her own safety. She does not have had to have humped him. She will have humped him. Utad provoked Finan in a tone which suggested that the matter could never have been anything else. Because he was bored and didn't want to think about the battle, he reasoned later. Because he was embarrassed that Ethelstan knew about his grandchildren, who had been in the care of Constantine since Sigtryggr lost his life to the pestilence that had killed Edith, shortly after Ethelstan's coronation. But, as soon as he said it, he felt a deep punch of regret. Finan told him. But Utad was not finished. If she is married, I say they will have humped. Utad persisted. And what do you mean? You rejected her. He watched Finan give a sigh, one that was controlled, deliberate. Do I have to tell you again? That time I arranged for Prince Domhnall to spirit her away from Berwick. The bare ass. Oh, that, Utad replied, dismissively. hoping to bring the awkward conversation to an end. But, she is married to the Uineel bastard, the one who rescued her from the Northern Sea when you and your brother tied her naked to a rock so she would drown? Because we were spoiled, cruel bastards then, and she told us she was a witch controlling the sun. Finan replied, still facing Utad, still refusing to move aside. And there is a law in Ireland that makes a prince lose his position for marrying a rejected lady? Finan nodded. Christ, I know why you didn't want to go back there, Utad told his friend, knowing fully why he didn't want to go back to his homeland. Not that much belonged to the Shadowkin Chapter now. Norse ruled in the place where Finan and Connell's father had reigned. Even Merchada was having trouble holding the Uineel lands. Still, she'll have been on her back, and Utad mimed a pair of hands mauling a pair of breasts. All she ever wanted was your respect, Utad, Finan told him, the words wretched as he spoke them, all she has ever wanted. And without waiting for his lord and best friend, stalked back to their lodgings. 88,888,888 I do remember, I believe they were the same people as built the brocks. It was night, although the burning torches morning, and Osrith had awoken from a bed in the corner of a room. Her nephew's room. Bishop Oswald was sitting when she opened her eyes, peering down at something in his hands. He had turned when he heard movement and they had discussed the conversation she had overheard when the bodies had been brought into the chapel and Osrith, accepting a cup of milk, asked about the Itacotti brocks. Osrith got to her feet folding up the blanket under which she had rested, and as the candles guttered from a door opening and closing beyond Oswald's quarters, in the chapel, blowing air along a passageway, she listened as he explained. Osrith had seen one, having travelled with Saenid into Pitland, north of Dunnottar brocks were stone towers with an inner wall, free-standing with no mortar, unlike Roman buildings, put together with such skill that even the strongest northerly gales had never brought one down. Storehouses, Engus told me, she told Oswald, although sometimes families were laid to rest there. Really? Bishop Oswald mused. The king would like to know that. He told Osrith and told her of Ethelstan's interest in the ancient monuments of the country. Then, he came to sit by Osrith. Why did you come? You could have gone anywhere. You could have gone to Arion, to Francia. I came to be beside Utad, she told him, and felt the relief flood her that she had finally been able to say it, and she took her nephew's hand, and added, and you should, too. For this battle tomorrow will be terrible, bigger and more violent than ever, and, Osrith broke off. Yet, I am a Gaelish prince, and by rights, I should not be south, but north. Yet you are not, Oswald told her, taking her hand, gently as a wooden door banged in the distance. I am not, agreed Osrith. My king is dead, and my oath to Constantine dissolved. And yet Osrith gazed at the wooden walls of her nephew's quarters and fixed her eyes northwest. Young Finan fights for Constantine. He has married his Edra to Anlaf and I am married to Domhnall. Should I not seek him out? If your head thought this was the right choice, you would be with Constantine now, Bishop Oswald pointed out. So, which will you choose? I do not yet know. But I feel, I am certain, that I am close to our ancestor here, she told him, putting a hand on his shoulder. Llangwin fought until he could fight no more in a war which was like this, where war was the only choice. Penda's war, Bishop Oswald said, though he was not telling Osrith, for she knew better than he that King Oswald, then sent Oswald, had brought every warrior Northumbria had in order to face the last pagan kingdom of the Heptarchy. But, do not get cut down and hacked to pieces, aunt, Bishop Oswald told her. Do not fight, leave, go back to Berwick, find solace in your land. And just then, Osrith remembered him, her nephew, lying in agony after Brida had gelded him, calling out for the love of their ancestor Oswald. It was why he had chosen the name, that of their ancestor, the great Saint Oswald, first Christian king of Northumbria. A shout went up, and a call, to him, the Bishop of Cester. He was needed in the chapel. Go and find Utad, Shay urged again, as Bishop Oswald dropped her hand and walked towards the door. He turned, and gave her a look of sadness and regret. "And say what? That you love him," Osrith said to her nephew, "and that you will no longer carry this grief in your heart.